Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got Gas, the morning edition. And I'm getting ready for a weekend full of West Coast customs. Yeah, we're going up to Santa Maria Friday night for the cruising. It's going to be a great cruise night in downtown Santa Maria. Everybody invited. That's the rumor I've heard. I'm going to be there. Hot Rod Holly's going to join us. We're going to caravan up there. It's going to be a great weekend up there for West Coast Customs. Yes, shh, it's a secret. Don't tell anybody. Morning, Neil Panks from Great Britain. How are you doing this morning? Hey, turbocharging. Something we think about today as a great power adder. But people today think it is something new from today. It's not, guys. It's old school. That's right. Old school. Now, when I say old school, I'm talking 1920s and 30s. That's when the turbocharger was first invented. And it didn't work all that well. They hadn't got all the bugs worked out of it. But by World War II, it was on planes. That's right. Besides nitrous oxide being injected into the system, turbochargers help produce extra power when those fighter planes needed to get away or catch the enemy. And they did. But by the 1960s, auto manufacturers said, hey, this might work on our stuff too. And one of the interesting cars that it came out on was the Olds F-85, the Cutlass. Yeah. Now, it wasn't the first to get it. The Corvair beat it to market with just, a few weeks anyway. But the Oldsmobile Cutlass, the Jetfire, they called it, little F-85, my mother had one. It was great. But the problem with that car was it took that little aluminum V8 from a mere 185 horsepower to 215, 1 horsepower per cubic inch. But it was confusing to operate, and I'll tell you why. You needed an extra bottle full of this mixture, and the mixture was distilled water. Bottled water wasn't real popular back in the 1960s, especially in 1963. It also required methanol, a corrosion inhibitor mixture. And this also prevented detonation. So basically you had water injection and methanol, but where did you buy that stuff? Well, you go to the local drugstore and buy your alcohol and put it in there. Hey, what the heck, a little Jim Beam in the tank? That'll work. No, didn't work. But anyway, that was part of the problem. So what people did was they did not continue to put water in the tank. And there was a special tank. It wasn't in the fuel tank, guys. It was a special little canister that you put this mixture into, and it injected it into the carburetor as you drove. But that was the problem. People didn't do that. So these things detonated themselves to death. It only lasted a short time. Now the Corvair, though, turbo. Yeah, that little flat 6 with turbocharger. Now initially putting out 140 horsepower, better than the 190 it came with standard, and it was a little bitty rocket ship. They came up to 150 horsepower later, then even later, about 180 horsepower out of that flat 6 with a turbocharger on it. This is before Porsche put the turbo on the 911s, guys. The American car manufacturers hit the turbo scene first in regular production, but it really didn't catch on. And part of the reason was, back in those days, unlike today, the turbos were not water-cooled. And one of the issues they had was coking. Now, coking is when you shut the engine off and the turbo is still spooled up pretty good. People didn't think about the times they had to slow the engine down, let it idle for a few moments, let that turbine inside that turbocharger slow down, because that turbo was hot. You got to remember, the exhaust comes in on one side. That makes that one side really hot, and the other side that pumps out into the engine is not really cool, but it is cooler. So what ended up happening was you shut the engine down as soon as you parked. Turbo was still spooled up. Oil flow has now stopped because the engine's no longer running. So the oil flow to the bearing in the turbocharger would coke or cook the oil and it would crud up and it would block the oil passages. Eventually, no oil going to the bearings, you ate the turbo. And that was the issue. Maintenance was not what it is today. Oils were not what they are today. And I say maintenance wasn't what it is today. People in general, still today, do not set up their appointments for vehicle maintenance as often as they should. Ooh, a light just came on. I got to set up an appointment for my wife's car. So do that. Think about that. So the turbocharger first came out in American cars, 1963. The Corvair Monza, although it was introduced in 1959. The Corvair first came out with the turbo, followed by the Oldsmobile Cutlass. Now, Buick did not get a version of this. They didn't think their owners were up to the extra horsepower. Buick really wasn't a performance image vehicle at that point in time. Oldsmobile still had a bit of a performance image dating back to the days of the Rocket V8. And the Olds Cutlass, my mother had the 1963. I thought that was a cool car. Didn't have a 4-speed, though. Oh, well. Some people. All right, next up. BMWs. Not an American car, but BMW came up with a turbocharged regular production vehicle. It was the 2002 Turbo. Now, I didn't get to own one of those, but I did get to drive one. That was a beast. I had a 2002 TII, which was a mechanical fuel-injected 2-liter. It was great. Now, Richard Turner says he's got a 65, 164 cubic inch Corvair, 180 horsepower. Mobile One is wonderful. And I agree, Richard, with the advent of synthetic oils, the ability to maintain a turbocharged engine for a longer period of time is far greater. I went 197,000 miles on my turbocharged Chevy HHR, and the turbo never had a problem. The issue was it blew a hole in a piston. Okay, so I got a little heavy foot. Who knows? But yes, the synthetic oils, I've been using synthetic oils since the late 1970s, and I swear by them. They're in every one of my cars. That is what I run, and mileage, not a problem. All right, so we know the turbo Porsche came out, but what about the Saab? Now, here's a General Motors company again. General Motors bought the Saab Corporation and started producing those Saabs with various engines, some of them GM-based and such. But the turbo Saab, that was cool. The 900 series. It was a neat little car. Wasn't the highest horsepower, 143. Then they bumped it up to 185, but it was cool. It was a nice coupe, interesting styling. Now, a friend of mine had one. One of the things I thought that was really interesting is the ignition key was in the console, on the floor. Hey, Richard Candahead, how you doing in Texas this morning? Paul Whitehouse, how are you? Mercedes, we know, has had a bunch of turbos on their things, but I'm more interested in the American cars. And yeah, we know Audi later on and so forth. How about the Buick Grand National? I know most people consider the 80s a dark age for muscle cars. American performance was lacking. They had switched to the net rating on horsepower. So people thought, oh, the engines are bad. We've got less horsepower. No, it was a different rating system. Yes, Sam, the 99, the Saab 99 Turbo. They were cool. Neat cars, too. I really do like the Saab styling. It's just too bad Saab has gone away. But let's get back to that Buick. So 1982, Buick started experimenting with turbocharging. Now, they're looking for a performance image. They're trying to get rid of the stodgy image they've got because the average buyer of a Buick was 70 years old. Yeah, that's the demographics, folks. 70 years old. Makes you wonder why General Motors kept Buick in the United States and closed down Pontiac and Oldsmobile, both with younger draw audiences. But they did, because the Buick was popular in China. But here's the problem. In the 1980s, Buick started turbocharging that little V6 they had. That V6 was stout, and they would turbocharge that thing, getting some pretty good numbers. When the Grand National first came out, it was basically a modified Buick Regal T-Type. They showed it at the Detroit Auto Show with blacked out trim. And it was cool. Yes, 1978 Regal LeSabre T-Type turbos. That's when they started playing with them, Sam. And The Grand National was a show vehicle. Now, it was a styling exercise. They blacked out the chrome and the anodized aluminum. They put in some special two-tone bucket seats, different wheels, gave it an aggressive appearance. It was an instant hit and went right into production, pretty much the same thing as the show vehicle. And it started to draw attention, and people started coming into the showroom to buy it. The problem was, when a 40-year-old comes into a Buick dealership, they don't know what to do with them. That's right. They're looking for the stodgy people that want to drive their couch driving down the street. Now some younger person comes in wanting a performance vehicle, and the salesmen are all, what do you do? The Buick Grand National was a great car, sitting on the same chassis as the Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Now, in 49 state trim, the Monte Carlo got the Turbo 6 as well. Not in California. So California people that are watching this, you may not have known this, but when I lived in Texas, I did see turbo factory charged Monte Carlos. And Mark McGeorge can probably support that. He was the car handler for General Motors marketing division I worked for. All right, now, the Grand National jumped from 175 horsepower to 200. Now, that 175 may not have been that impressive. 200 was better. And finally, they got to 235. However, in 1987, Generous Motors released the most exciting version of that Grand National. It was called the GNX, Grand National Experimental. 275 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. And I believe it was 1987, the front row at Indianapolis, the top 3 qualifiers, when they still had the stock block rule, were Buick V6 turbos. Now, unfortunately, they didn't last long and didn't finish the race, but they made it to the front row of Indianapolis. Turbocharged Buicks. First time in history, and they did it. The Grand National, great car. Love to be able to afford one of those things. Comfortable, fun to drive. Now, Ford has toyed with turbocharging for a long time, and they came out with a special version called the Mustang SVO. Got to drive one of those. Less than impressive to me when I first got into it, but it was interesting. In 1979, when the Fox body Mustangs first came out, they tried turbocharging them. Didn't get too much recognition. So what they did is they took the Mustang, created some different body parts, added a turbocharged 2.3-liter 4-cylinder, special suspension, special interior, Recaro bucket seats, and the SVO was born in 1984. 2.3 liters and 175 horsepower. Take that, Buick. They had more horsepower out of a 4-cylinder than you were getting out of a V6. Well, that worked, and the SVO Mustang was an exciting vehicle. The problem was it cost more than a Mustang GT with a V8. So, not many SVOs were sold. They lasted for about 3 years. The SVO ended up at 205 horsepower, and that turned the eyes of the American public. But not enough to buy them because they were too expensive in comparison to a Mustang GT. It's a better car, better balanced, 4-cylinder up front, less weight. Yeah, it just didn't click. Love to have one of those too. Problem's finding one of those that hasn't been cut up and butchered. Alan's telling me about a turbo Chevy Sprint, which was basically the Suzuki 3-cylinder with a turbo. Smoked the tires all day long. Yeah, those little front driver's boxes were good. Yes, Mark, going to get to the Cyclone and the Typhoon as well. Now, we know about Porsches and Ferraris. Yeah, the Nissan Z turbo. Yeah, okay. Supra. Yeah, okay. They were turboed. Skyline from Nissan never came into the U.S., but yeah, okay. Jaguar. Oh, yeah. The XJ220. Beautiful car, but Sam Fiorini saying in 1986 the SVO had more power than the 302. It did, but it was also more expensive, and people just went for that traditional V8 grunt. Turbo Sprint, a ripping 70 horsepower, yeah, but 40 plus miles per gallon too. All right, now from GM, and Mark just brought that up again. Mark was my car handler for Generous Motors when I was with the marketing department. GM Typhoon. Now, you'd never think of a GMC as a performance vehicle. No one did. And that may have been part of the problem. But it was the first turbocharged SUV to hit the streets. They used a 4.3-liter Chevy-based V6 engine, and it pumped out 280 horsepower. Now, that may not be impressive by today's V8 numbers we're getting, but back in 1981, this was a great number. As a matter of fact, it was more horsepower than a Corvette. And it was a four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive SUV. How about that? Two-door S10 body style with horsepower to spare. Now, a few of them come out to the drag strip, and they are quick. They really surprise people sometimes. The Typhoon could out-accelerate a V8 from 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds. Now, there was Typhoons, and there were, the pickup version of it. Mark will tell me what that is in just a moment. We know the Subarus had that turbocharged WRX. Ford's done some V6 turbocharging on their Rapture pickup trucks, and these are kind of interesting. You got a big, heavy F-Series truck. Sam Fiorani, 1991. Yes, that was the year for it. Well, the Ford Rapture 150, F-150, turbocharged V6 with a 10-speed automatic translation. 3.5-liter V6, 450 horsepower. Cyclone, that's right, Typhoon and Cyclone. Thanks, Sam. So the Typhoon was the SUV. The Cyclone was the S10 pickup. Turbocharged 4.3, and those babies moved. And they were all black. Cool-looking trucks. Mark McGeorge saying the 959 had viscous coupling drive. You know, most of the cars with all-wheel drive have gone to the viscous coupling. That's basically a canister filled with silicone gel and plates inside that try and cut through the gel. It makes a non-mechanical link to all-wheel drive, to the different wheels, front to rear, and so forth. Thanks, Phil Hoffman, for your input as well. All right, so back to the Ford. 3.5-liter turbocharged V6, 450 horsepower, 510 foot-pounds of torque. This six-cylinder is putting out some horsepower, and these are cool. All right, what else have we got from American cars? Well, we know about the R5, and kind of an R5 Renault, but kind of a Mopar, because at one point in time, Chrysler sold the Renault R5s here in the U.S. Now, they didn't get the turbo, though. What we got in the U.S. was the Le Car, as they called it. It was a little front-wheel drive four-cylinder. Fun car to toss around. Got to drive one once. Weren't too bad back at the time. But the turbocharged R5 with the rear-wheel drive was the hot ticket. 160 horsepower at 1.4 liters. That was pretty darn good. The whole car was redesigned and re-engineered to move the engine from the front under the hood to the space behind the driver, a mid-engine car, and this baby was cool with big blister flares and such, and it was one of the craziest hatchbacks produced, but it was cool. More cars were turbocharged. How about Callaway? That's right, Callaway. Yeah, AMC sold it, not Chrysler. That's right. You're right, Sam. It was before Chrysler took over AMC. God, I get those so confused. I appreciate your input. All right, Callaway turbos. Callaway Sledgehammer Corvette C4. Now, Reeves Callaway established Callaway cars in 1977, long after the muscle car craze had winded down, but he was still doing some high-performance stuff. He specialized in producing turbocharger kits. Now, he installed them mostly on European cars, and his knowledge and expertise of the turbo era was pretty darn good. And he decided the C4 Corvette was an exciting vehicle. And it was when it was introduced in 1984. As a matter of fact, it was so good, SCCA, after plenty of protests from racers, had to create a special class for the C4 Corvettes because they were so much better than everything else around. Pontiac Sunbird Turbo. I don't remember that. Mark McGeorge, you might be able to check in on that one because you were there. Sunbird 2000. We'll have to look at that. But anyway, the Sledgehammer. Callaway decided to produce a 1988 Corvette with 898 horsepower that had a top speed of over 250 miles an hour. The Sledgehammer. Special body parts on it made the C4 look even more mean. Different front bumper, different intake in the front, ahead of the hood, side scoops. They were kind of cool. And it used the same wheels that Corvette was using in the Corvette Challenge series. Different hood. It was just a neat looking car. Plus, it ran. You could buy it through your Chevrolet dealer. It was kind of neat back in the day. Pontiac did have a turbocharged car as well. The 20th anniversary Trans Am. Now, there was only about 1,500 of these built. They used the same Buick turbo that was in the Grand National. Same one that was in the Grand National X, as a matter of fact. And it was good. It was faster, 1/10 of a second than the big Buick, but it was lighter. So it went 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. It was a cool machine. Vector was a company that tried to produce an exotic car here in the U.S. Never really got off the ground. Yeah, 40 XP turbos too. You're right, Sam. I remember that little car. A buddy of mine had one. Kind of a strange looking machine, little 2-door coupe with kind of frog eyes in the front. Edgar Glenn's watching us as well. The Vector W8 was a wedge-shaped V8 powered monster. Chevrolet V8 power was 1990. It was an ambitious product from Vector Automotive Corporation under the cover of an American powerhouse. It was a Chevrolet small block, 625 horsepower, but the twin-turbo 6-liter version was capable of 1,200 horsepower. Lot of great cars. All right, Buick did turbocharge their latest and greatest, Buick Regal GS. For decades, Buick didn't have the power or muscle machine. Now, people think they do. Vector W8, about 21 built. Yeah, it was an exciting looking car for the time. It was just unfortunate it never got off the ground. So in 2012, GM's Opel division worked with Buick. And you got to remember, that was when GM still owned Opel. They're gone now. They rebadged the Opel Insignis as a Regal. It was turbocharged. They called it the Regal GS. Stats were pretty good. Turbocharged 4-cylinder. Same one that was in my HHR. And this was an engine used universally throughout GM line. The 2-liter. Now, Chevrolet had what they call the Ecotec engines. There was a 2.2, a 2.4, naturally aspirated, and the 2-liter turboed. That 2-liter turbo motor was an excellent motor. Still in production today. Now, mine came factory with, let's see, it was 230 or 240 horsepower. Now, when I fixed it or put the factory upgrade in, it was 290 horsepower, 305 foot-pounds of torque. That thing would outrun my Corvette with no problems at all and then deliver 35 miles per gallon on the highway. That same 2-liter engine is in various GM vehicles, including the Buick. It ended up in the Solstice, as you're saying, Sam, and the GXP, which is kind of a neat machine. That was going to be my next company car. As a matter of fact, the coupe version. And there were just a few of those made. And then Pontiac got the Axe. And so did I shortly thereafter, when GM discontinued the truck division and Pontiac. But yes, the GXP Solstice, turbocharged 2-liter, 275 horsepower is what they rated that one at. Now, you can still get the same upgrade kit I had on my HHR, bumping it up to 290 horsepower, but that extra 15 horsepower, don't know if it was worth it, but the torque definitely was. 305 foot-pounds of torque. That little Solstice was a Miata beater even without the turbo. Then you add the turbo. That car was amazing. Excellent handling car. Hot Rod magazine even took that turbo or the Pontiac Solstice and put an LS Series V8 in it, found out through the parts departments that certain parts from other cars fit, and the Cadillac CTS V rear axle setup fit right in the back of that Solstice, and it can take the power that the V8 put out. But that's off the track here. All right, so Buick ended up putting the 2-liter turbocharged engine, bumped up the horsepower to 280 with a 6-speed manual transmission and all-wheel drive. Remember hearing about that car? Neither did I. Why? It's a Buick! Again, marketing department and the buyers of Buick in the U.S. are just old, and it just didn't work. Hi, Brian. How are you doing today? Well, we're looking at some of the American cars and others. Now, it didn't make it to the U.S., but it was a hit in Europe. The Ford Escort RS Cosworth. This is an amazing little car. And Ford just didn't bring it into the U.S., and I'm not quite sure why. Now, Ford wanted to rule the hot hatchback class in Europe, and they did. The Escort RS Cosworth model, using the Sierra RS Cosworth bits, the Escort was smaller, 227 horsepower in street trim. It was a cool car. 0 to 60, 5.8 seconds. Beat most sports cars at the time. Couldn't get a stick in an all-wheel drive in the Regal, which is why I didn't get one. Except that Buick says they did have that. They just didn't let anybody know. All right, so that's turbocharged in American style. We beat some of the domestics to the punch with turbocharging in 1963. Ford never didn't catch on until the Mustang came out. And American cars and turbos. So what's old is new. So you youngsters at the drag strips and on the road courses that think turbocharging is the wave of the future, you know, you're right. But it's also part of the past. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas. The morning edition brought to you by Service Tech, where you can get all the equipment you need for the shop you've got to work on that car. Service Tech in Simi Valley, California. Talk to Craig there. Tell him you heard about him on GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene. Valley Head Service. Don't forget, West Coast Customs. I'm leaving out here Friday afternoon for the Friday night cruising. It's impromptu, unscheduled, and it's open to everybody in Santa Maria, California. All right, I'm Hot Rod Bob. Take care. West Coast Customs this weekend. See you there.